board will now come to order. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Alderman Troop, Alderwoman Flowers, Alderman Bosley, Alderman Moore, Alderwoman Griffin, Alderwoman Triplett, Alderwoman Young, Alderman Conway, Alderman Ortman, Alderman Vollmer, Alderman Villa, Alderman Arnowitz, Alderman Wessels, Alderwoman Howard, Alderwoman Florida, Alderwoman Behringer, Alderman Rhodey, Alderman Kennedy, Alderwoman Davis, Alderman Schmidt, Alderman French, Alderman Boyd, Alderman Vaccaro, Alderman Ogilvie, Alderman Cone, Alderman Williamson, Alderman Carter, Alderwoman Cruzen, President Reed.
Here.
Alderman Troop, Alderman Bosley, Alderwoman Griffin, Alderwoman Triplett, Alderwoman Young, Alderman Conway, Alderman Wessels, Alderwoman Howard, Alderman Rhodey, Alderman Kennedy, Alderwoman Davis, Alderman Boyd, Alderman Ogilvie, Alderman Williamson, Alderman Carter, Alderwoman Cruzen, 18 present.
Quorum being present, I'll ask everyone in chambers and the galleries to please rise for prayer. Almighty God, source of all authority, we humbly ask guidance in our deliberations and wisdom in our conclusions. Amen. Dispense with line item 3, introduction of honored guests. Any introduction of honored guests? Alderman from the 9th.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the board. I'd like to have today for my honored guest, Ronnie Auer, and he's in the air conditioner in the leisure room. Thank you.
Welcome, Ron. Alderman from the 16th.
Thank you, Mr. President and members of the board. I would like to have as my guests today Anthony Lancia with the AGC, Don Summers, and David Holmes with the Plumbers and Pipe Fitters.
Any further introductions? Alderman from the 11th.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, as my honored guest today, I would like to introduce Mr. Sean Weller, who is a tax deduction for former State Representative Phil Berry and a resident graduate student at UMSL.
All right, thank you. Sean, after all those years, I'm glad that somebody finally recognized you as an honored guest. Most people think that you're one of the members of the board, so welcome today. Any further introductions? Any further introductions? Alderman from the 10th would like to wrap us up.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the board. As we gather here on this Independence Day weekend, it is indeed my pleasure to have as my guest the one, the only Freddie the Firecracker step in.
Alderman from the 13th recognized on approval of the minutes. Alderman from the 7th, you'd like to make that motion?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move for approval of the minutes of the June 10th meeting.
Second.
Been moved by the Alderman from the 7th, seconded by the Alderman from the 19th. Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Report of city officials.
Report of city officials can be found in sections A and B of the agenda and have been placed in all aldermen's mailboxes. I have from His Honor the Mayor the following correspondence. Dear members of the board, I have the pleasure to submit the following individual for reappointment to the Forest Park Advisory Board. The reappointment of Ms. Jean Cowell, who resides at 1031 Louisville and whose term will expire on June the 26th, 2015. I respectfully request your approval of this appointment. Sincerely, Francis G. Slay, Mayor, City of St. Louis.
Alderman from 28th, you recognize on the mayor's appointment to the Forest Park Advisory Board.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the board. I move for the appointment of Gene Cowell to the confirmation of Gene Cowell to the Forest Park Advisory Board.
Moved by the Alderman from the 28th, seconded by the Alderman from the 20th. Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Dear members of the board, I have the pleasure to submit the following individuals for a reappointment to the St. Louis Affordable Housing Commission. The reappointment of Mr. David Mason, who resides at 4537 Westminster Place, and whose term will expire on June 30th, 2014. The reappointment of Michael Sorth, who resides at 3820 Regal Place, and whose term will expire on June 30th, 2014. I respectfully request your approval of these appointments. Sincerely, Francis G. Slay, Mayor, City of St. Louis.
Alderman from the 13th, you recognize on the mayor's appointment to the St. Louis Affordable Housing Commission.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move to approve the mayor's appointments to the Affordable Housing Commission.
Moved by the Alderman from the 13th, seconded by the Alderman from the 20th. Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Dear members of the board, I have the pleasure to submit the following individual for appointment to the St. Louis Zoo Sub-District Advisory Board. The appointment of Mrs. Carol Wilson, who resides at 6539 Itasca, and whose term will expire on December 31st, 2015. I respectfully request your approval of this reappointment. Sincerely, Francis G. Slay, Mayor, City of St. Louis.
Alderman from 28th, you recognize on the mayor's appointment to the St. Louis Zoo Sub-District Advisory Board.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the board. I move to confirm the mayor's appointment of Carol Wilson to the St. Louis Zoo District Advisory Board.
Moved by the Alderman from the 28th. Entertain a second on that motion. Seconded by the Alderman from the 16th. Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
That's the extent of report of city officials.
We'll dispense with line item 7. Would anyone like to take any bills off of any of our informal calendars? Would anyone like to? Alderman from the 7th, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the board. I'd like to take up Board Bill 2, Committee Substitute.
All right. Please move for the perfection of Board Bill 2, Committee Substitute, Alderwoman.
I'd like to move for perfection of Board Bill 2, Committee Substitute.
Moved by the Alderman from the 7th, second by the Alderman from the 20th. Alderman from the 7th, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to offer a floor substitute for Board Bill 2.
All right, is it on there?
And you will find it on your desk along with the exhibit that is attached to it.
All right. Would you like to make a motion for the introduction of the floor substitute for Board Bill number 2, Committee Substitute?
I would like to move. So move.
It's been moved by the Alderman from the 7th, seconded by the Alderman from the 20th. Alderman from the 7th, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the board. As we all know, after a census every 10 years, there is a requirement that we reallocate or redistribute the population based on the most recent census figures. There are 28 of us on the board, and so we have been in the process of drawing new boundaries based on that census since the new session began. What you have before you, I believe, is the end product of that process. The process has been one where all of us sat down with basically a goal of being able to talk about with one another about what are the priorities, what are the needed areas that need to be retained in the wards, and the goal was to try to do so without moving a ward as had occurred previously. I think we've accomplished that. We have had numerous meetings with each of you as individuals, with each of you, with your neighbors, in order to be able to get the maps that you see on the wall around the room before you today. Not everybody's happy. Most people are not happy, but I figure if we've done that, then we've been successful because nobody's gloating at one another. I can tell you from my experience, it's been like the kids' game of whack-a-mole, where one thing moves and that triggers 3 or 4 other things to move. So I am happy to say that I feel that we've reached the end of the line here, that we have come up with the map that should be in place for the next 10 years. And with that, I renew my motion.
Any further discussion? Any further discussion? It's been moved and seconded that we adopt the floor substitute. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Alderman from the 7th, you're now recognized on the perfection of the floor substitute.
I move for perfection of Board Bill 2 floor substitute.
Moved by the Alderman from the 7th, seconded by the Alderman from the 20th. Any discussion? Alderman from the 8th.
Yeah, good morning, Mr. President, members of the board. I know I won't be here in 10 years, so I do want to point out a number of things with respect to this process. During this last population census, if you look at the population counts here, there's some technical issues that the people that are here 10 years need to understand 10 years from now. Most of the wards that are represented by white aldermen have 1,000 more people than the wards represented by African Americans. I mean, that's kind of a technical problem, I would say, because 20 years ago when this happened, and they intentionally made all the white wards larger and the black wards smaller, then when you go 10 years along later, you obviously have to eliminate an alderman. And you'll be in all that racial rancor 10 years from now. All you have to do is look at the population count. The other thing that's not here is what our computer program showed us as we dragged that cursor over various parts of the ward. And it seemed that much of this redistricting was premised on what that cursor may tell you as to the racial makeup of each ward. And what's truly unfortunate is we have nothing, especially through the center of the city, that is compact or contiguous. There's nobody that can stand here and look me in the eyes and tell me that that's compact and contiguous. And I would ask the press to investigate, how are all those lines and fingers all over the place through the center of the city, and why are they there? That does not do a service to the residents of the city of St. Louis. Then when you chop up and fragment their neighborhoods, you diminish their ability to have a voice at City Hall. You look through the central corridor of the city of St. Louis, and it's chopped 10 ways to Sunday. That those residents that are on the fingers throughout, you don't really count in the big picture. You have no collective voice here at City Hall because you're an insignificant little nad or fingertip on a map to an elected official. That's a problem, because as we try to encourage people to come back in the city of St. Louis, and as our resources are diminishing here at the city of St. Louis, you have to have an alderman that is effective for you and that will respond to you. That map through the center of the city diminishes those residents' ability to participate in government. That just really isn't right. There probably should have been a single ward for downtown. Those residents of downtown, they're between 4 and 5 different wards. That's a real problem for them. Those are the people that we look forward to bringing this city the growth and going forward. Yet, we've diminished any ability they are to have an effective voice here in city government. Look at those counts on your board bill number 2. Figure out what we try to do here. It just isn't right. And for those people here, the message is for 10 years from now, you're going to have a nightmare on your hands because we're going to have such a great loss of population. There's no way that you can get away with trying to say all of the wards represented by an African American are 8% smaller than the ward that's represented by a white alderman. That's not really right either. Think about it, what we're doing here today. Those of you who think, oh, well, you know, we have to move forward into a new society, a new way of thinking, well, that's not a very good start of moving forward and moving people forward. And I would just hope that with time, and if you live in those areas, there are different avenues of recourse for you to help you protect your community, to go forward. But you were treated in many cases like what we would call chattel, just little pawns and little numbers to balance out what people needed. It's not right. It wasn't in the best interest in the city of St. Louis. The 8th Ward, you know, I'm okay with the 8th Ward. It's a nice square. It's full neighborhoods. But chopping up the neighborhoods through the middle of the city is not right. Thank you.
That's the craziest thing. Alderman from the 20th, you're recognized.
Members of the board, I don't want to belabor this, but I've had some experience with this. And I don't know if folks can see this. It's kind of heavy, but you can see where the 20th Ward is. It's not in the center of the city. This is our current map. And I would argue that the 9th and the 20th are pretty well chopped up right now. And I'm suggesting that it's a difficult process. Last time, as you may recall, there was a ward called the 20th up on the north side that came to the south side. And then the 20th, I was the 10th Ward Alderman, and I was in the area that includes the Hill and Southwest Gardens and all that. I think the map is a difficult one, but it certainly last time created an accountability problem for 10 years for the constituents of the 9th and 20th. I think we've tried to address that. It's not perfect, but we did at least try to keep some of these neighborhoods compact and contiguous. So I appreciate what everybody's been doing to work on this, because our constituents down in the 9th and 20th and the constituents on the north side have suffered for the last 10 years.
All right, thank you, Alderman. Anyone discuss for the first time? Alderman from the 23rd.
Yeah, just a couple comments. One, I thank the Alderman of the 8th Ward for being a co-sponsor of the map that he's not happy about. And I also agree with the Alderman of the 22nd that if you want to see a chopped up, fingered out map, that was created 10 years ago. And unless I'm wrong, isn't downtown represented by 3 different alder people now? I believe that this map was well thought out. I think that the chair people and the co-chair people, as well as the president, worked hard with all the aldermen to make sure that we have a map that I'm comfortable with, and so are the 28 co-sponsors of it. And I obviously support this and think it's a great map, and disagree with some of the comments that were made.
All right, thank you, Alderman. Anyone want to speak for the first time?
Thank you, Mr. President and members of the board. I just want to very briefly say thank you to President Reed and the Alderwoman from the 7th for inviting me into this process early on, and thank my colleagues, Alderman from the 23rd and the Alderwoman from the 28th, for going through this process in a very collaborative way. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Alderman. Any further comments? Anyone want to speak for the first time on the bill? Alderman from the 27th.
Thank you, Mr. President. You know, I was here when we had that disaster 10 years ago. You know, we was cutting the map up. And it was a horrible process. I was part of the crew that was working with a group of people who was trying to save a ward. And no one really got along. On the floor of the Board of Aldermen, we had total chaos. This was probably the easiest and I guess the more, I would say, structured map with a collective body, all 28 aldermen who agreed on this. But I find it quite insulting that one of my colleagues would stand up here, and I took it as the alderman in South St. Louis was representing more of this city than the alderman in North St. Louis. And I took it when they put the map together that it was being a fair distribution of people, and aldermen was trying to protect their political position, and they more or less kept wards that could have been easily cut out, kept wards distributed throughout this entire city. Now, I was sitting here and I stepped out the room, I thought I heard my colleagues say that, and I took it very, very personal. Because as you know, Mr. President, when you were here at the Board of Aldermen down here, we spoke, and I spoke with a lot of my colleagues about trying to do a fair map. I think this is a fair map. I don't think one body of aldermen is representing this city more than another body. I mean, we're getting along just fine. But then you hear this, it's like something is being suppressed in an individual, and that individual is venting it here at the Board of Aldermen when it could have easily been vented privately, and we could have worked this out. Now, I was hoping that we get through this process without any issues or any problem, and every one of us are sponsoring this bill. If you didn't like the bill, you could have easily pulled your name off. You had a problem, you could have easily left your name off. So I'm a sponsor of this bill, co-sponsor of this bill. I work with my colleagues on all three sides of me, the 1st, the 22nd, and the 2nd Ward. And I work with Phyllis Young, who did a marvelous job along with our chairman of the caucus, Terry Kennedy. And everybody came through this process very quickly, easily. It was no problem, because I think the business of this city is more important. The progress of this city, I'm hoping that we are a very progressive city, is more important than being stuck on something back in the 70s and 80s and 90s. So with that, Mr. President, I continue to support this legislation, and I hope we can keep our personal opinions to ourselves. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Anyone want to speak for the first time? Alderman from the 1st.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President and members of the board. As I see the redistricting, I'd like to compliment the lady from the 7th and the gentleman from the 19th who worked very hard with both North and South St. Louis to see if we could come out of this redistricting with a degree of sanity different than what happened 10 years ago. 10 years ago, the redistricting, I think, divided both North St. Louis and South St. Louis. This bill was the culmination of leadership, I think, from the president of the Board of Aldermen, the lady from the 7th, and gentleman from the alderman from the 7th, and the alderman from the 19th Ward, 18th Ward, to make the bill more inclusive of both North and South St. Louis. And I think there had to have been a consensus there that helped to bring about the generation of this bill. So I commend the leadership, especially the president of the board, looking at how we could make sure that when this process was over, that we would have a city that was not split and a city that was working together. It took a lot of time. It took a lot of energy. We all moved. Everybody gave up something in order to keep the body whole intact. So the wards don't look like, I don't think anybody have a ward that looked like they wanted it to. And then to take and look at all of the work that the leadership and the chairman of the committee and the alderman from the 19th Ward put into making sure that we would have something that was positive out of this process is commendable. And I don't think that you should limit or reduce it to saying these are the white wards and these are the black wards, especially coming from a young man of this age who you would think that have lived long enough to know that at some point in time you have to put trivial childish actions behind you. And that's what I see this as being, a childish action by a brat.
Order.
From the
Please state your point of order, Alderman.
Those are personal attacks, and if they're okay down here, I'm more than happy to pursue that.
Could you state the rule that
would be an order of decorum, and that's fine. If that's okay,
state the rule. State the rule, because to call a point of order requires you to state the rule. If you can't state the rule, have your seat. Alderman from the first, please proceed.
Gentlemen, in closing, just let me say that there are forces that don't want this city to come together. There are forces that want this city to continue to be divided and to be stagnant and to be just a big, dirty town rather than a progressive, forward-looking city. And I think that when you look at the board as a whole now, it's different than it was 10 years ago. So the criteria that you used 10 years ago to eliminate the greatest Democratic vote-producing ward in the city, it hurt the Democratic Party, it hurt the city, and it hurt both North and South St. Louis. So I commend the chairman of the committee for being open. I commend the president in terms of how he got involved, and I commend the chairman of the caucus who worked tirelessly to get something that we all could agree on. And I think it's proven by the fact that we are here today, and the bill came out of committee with a supermajority. And I just hope that the gentleman, the alderman from the 8th, can refrain from making everything black and white. This was the math. And if you look at the math, it works for everybody in the city.
Thank you, Alderman. Anyone want to speak for the first time? Alderman from the 2nd.
Board, you know, there are just some things that the alderman from the 8th Ward can say that can just fire me up. I don't know what it is, and I'm hot. It's not because of the weather, but I just can't. It's just unbelievable some of the things that he says sometimes. And 10 years ago, you weren't concerned about contiguous lines then. 10 years ago, that issue didn't come up. I don't think you stood on the floor and said that. I think this process from 10 years ago this has been 100% much better. And I commend the alderwoman from the 7th for wanting to do this again. And I commend Terry Kennedy, the vice chair, for making this process go as smooth as possible. My ward has just gotten longer. I've stretched along the river, and I'm not complaining. I'm trying to make and be a part of this process and be as useful and helpful, and I think in other wards, not mine, there were a whole lot more tension and a whole lot more things that had to be decided on and agreed on and negotiated. And I think 2 of the wards that are African American represented, the 6th and the 19th, I don't think they really moved too far south. So I'm not really understanding where this is coming from. Other than the fact that I just think the process was smooth, I think it was respectful. I don't want to have to go through that again. And again, I mean, it's like you go in with the tide. It didn't matter then, but now it matters today. Only because maybe some people's wards were compromised to the point that you didn't like. I just don't understand your comments today, Alderman. I'm sorry.
All right, thank you. Anyone?
I didn't ask him to yield.
Anyone else for the first time? Alderman from the 19th.
Thank you, Mr. President. I stand because I'm a bit confused. One of the things that we have done over the last 6 weeks or so is to have a collaborative process that I thought was as fair as anything could be. When you negotiate with your colleagues next door to you, whether it's the north, south, east, or west, and make a determination on what your boundaries will be, I made an assumption that that was good faith effort, and it was a process that was done without having outside undue influence. I also wanted to recognize the fact that in the city of St. Louis, population was lost all over the city, not just in North St. Louis, but we lost approximately almost 12,000 people in the southern part of the city as well. So the overall city lost population, which made it even more difficult in a census process and looking at the redistricting process. But one of the great things in that is that you did have 4 wards in the city that gained population, which allowed us to be able to be flexible in those boundaries, and we could give population to other wards. So if you look at it in its totality, if you did not grow the population in the city of St. Louis, then I don't know what you're complaining about, except for the fact that all of us must work hard for the city as a whole and try to make sure that we are making the best decisions. And I know for myself and my deliberations, I tried to be as cooperative as possible. And I didn't want to argue with anybody. I gave up some things that I would rather have kept. But I know at the end of the day, I am an alderman. I will be an alderman within any boundaries that are assigned to me. And I will do it with grace, with professionalism, and also with pride. I do love my city. Thank you, Mr. President.
All right, thank you. Any further comments? Any further comments? Anybody for the first time? Anybody for the first time?
I'm Stan.
Alderman from the 13th.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President, members of the board. I would ask that the alderman from the 8th yield.
Alderman from the 8th, will you yield for questions to the alderman
Yes.
from the 13th?
Thank you.
Alderman from the 13th, please proceed.
Thank you. I was out of the chambers when you when you started your talk, and I missed the numbers. What are the population differentials in the wards? I thought that was your point.
Close to 1,000 in most cases. My point was this. It's not so much, and I know my colleagues are defensive, and the president is defensive. It's not that it is, and people don't want to hear me either, it's not that it's a problem with that. But when you say, and you're going to come here 10 years from now, you'll end up with an Alderman Schmidt thing again, because Alderman Schmidt's ward wasn't really drawn by the alderman, it was drawn by the civil rights lawyers 10 years ago. He admitted that. It's not about the exact numbers. You're going to end up with that problem 10 years from now. Okay, that when you make all of a certain area of the city's wards 1,000 people smaller, and you come 10 years from now, if we don't change the population direction, you're going to have a problem that we had 10 years ago. That's why Alderman Schmidt's ward was that way. Alderman Vaccaro didn't know that. But 10 years ago, that's why that ward was drawn that way. That when you're 1,000 short, 12 or 13 wards, that's 13,000 people. That's a full ward. Okay. That's not in the best interest of the city. You know, I know my colleagues think, well, boy, Steve says something, that's bad, because that might reflect bad, that might reflect that the caucus is getting over on people. You know what? People that get up and think that, that's because that's the way they think. When you're down 1,000 every ward, there's something wrong there. But that's not what I said, but that's what they thought I said. Overly defensive. You're 1,000 short on an average, more or less, across the board. That's not right.
Okay, thank you.
Any further discussion? Any further discussion? Alderman from the 11th, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. President. I've been viewing ward redistricting maps since 1950, unfortunately. And I can only tell you that as a personal witness, this has certainly been the smoothest and easiest and probably best managed. I applaud you, your office, the leadership, and particularly the lady from the alderman from the 7th. This exercise is an exercise in the macabre. It is impossible to make everybody happy. Whether we like it or not, the population of the city continues to shrink. And hopefully 10 years from now, and I think I can safely predict I won't be here, But when this exercise is done, let's hope that we're dividing a population of some 500,000 people in the same equitable and fair manner that this was addressed this particular session. Thank you, Mr. President.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Alderman. Any further discussion? Any further discussion? Anyone for the first time? Anyone for the first time?
I'm standing here.
Alderman from the 18th? Alderman from the 10th. Sorry, I missed you.
Thank you. I just wanted to know if the Alderman from the 8th would like to give me back the 500 people in the 12 blocks he took at the last minute.
Yeah. I don't think the Alderman from the 8th is going to take the mic and tell everybody his ward didn't change, but maybe 2 blocks. Anybody else for the first time? Any comments for the first time? Alderman from the 8th, you're recognized one more time.
Making sure that I'm a little short down here. I want to make sure I'm seen. Sometimes I need to be heard because that's an important message. You know, among the 28 individuals here, yes, this went smooth. You know, and that part of the process went smooth. I mean, everybody's got to give and go, whatever the case might be. And that part, I mean, and I know it wasn't easy on Alderwoman Young, and I'm sure I called President Reed a couple of times to give him a little grief on lines wiggling around by me. But you guys, and especially you younger people, because I'm getting older, you know, you got to think about where we're going to be in 10 years. When I point out that these things and these neighborhoods are getting chopped up, and yeah, I really wanted my whole neighborhood together, and I think everybody that surrounded me wanted the whole Shaw neighborhood, and I do believe in that, and I am thankful that that's there. But I'm pointing out the obvious direction we're going, that if we don't change direction going forward about working together and not being defensive about it, because I'm clearly not defensive about it, because I'm one of the few people who will actually get up and talk about it objectively here, that if we don't get, Alderman, if we don't move forward, protect these neighborhoods in the center of the city, get housing going in areas where we're losing citizens, and most importantly, improve our schools, you know, we're going to be down to 7,000 or 8,000 people apiece. I think the last time we were at 12.8, right around there, or the 8th Ward was at 12.8, and I think the average now is 11.4. The wards continue to shrink as we go forward. You know, the people out there sometimes think, well, maybe there's too many of us. I don't agree with that assessment, because as we go broke, as we run out of money, it is harder and harder to deliver those services unless you've got an alderman putting their hands on city bureaucracy and making sure things get done in your neighborhood. But what I'm telling you is 10 years from now, you don't want to be set up for what we saw 10 years ago. And whether that's right or wrong or you're offended by it, I mean, those are your personal opinions. But if you don't make changes to the city and how we operate here and work together, then we're going to be in that same place 10 years from now that we were 10 years ago. And again, I will point out for the alderman of the 20th why that ward was drawn that way. That had nothing to do with us. That was a group of civil rights lawyers that reviewed this and said that ward had to be that way. Whether we like it or not, when you throw the civil rights lawyers in, you've got to kind of do what they say. You know, you don't want a map that's going to be challenged. That's why you listen to them. There was nothing nefarious against him or anything else at that point in time. That's how it was drawn. I give you the explanation of why it was drawn that way, but that's not the point. Yes, this process went smooth. I'm sure Alderwoman Young feels a few years older after this process because, you know, I'm a pretty easygoing guy. But I know, you know, some of my colleagues might not be as easygoing as me on this process. And yes, the process didn't have the rancor that we had 10 years ago, because 10 years ago's problem was accumulation of what we did 20 years ago, or basically about 18 years ago. When you start making the ward smaller, it's going to come back and bite you in the rear end 10 years from now. And that message is, you older guys, you don't care, we won't be here in 10 years. The younger people have to rely on what is said today and why they get to where they are in 10 years, unless the aldermen make a difference throughout the city and the schools make a difference and we increase the population. Thank you.
Any further discussion? Alderman from the 18th, you recognize.
Yes, Mr. President, members of the board. Thank you for turning on the microphone. Appreciate it. I'd like to thank the Alderwoman from the 7th for her leadership in this process. I was here 10 years ago, and I was here, this is actually my 3rd redistricting, and this was the most civil that I had seen. I'd like to thank you, Mr. President, for making sure that the proper resources were there in terms of both the computer and the computer program, and getting us started there so that we have the necessary tools to do this in a humane manner. 10 years ago, to say the least, was a fiasco and didn't fully represent the potentiality of these 28 or 29 individuals with the president in this board to act civil and humane with each other. I think this term, this particular time under the leadership of the Alderwoman from the 7th, showed what could be done. I think that we have a greater cohesion as well as a greater interaction and an improved relationship with each other as alder people than what I have seen since I've been here at the board. But in any body like this that is designed to openly discuss the issues, there's always differences of opinion. Unfortunately, the press tends to show the differences of opinion as if there is always a fight or a war, when bodies like this are designed for open discussion, debate, and to deal with this dialogue in an open manner so people can all hear and articulate the ideas. The leadership, I believe, that was shown here helped to have a civil process and to lead to the map that we have here today. I do not believe that this particular map is any less contiguous than what was done 10 years ago. The alderman from the 20th clearly showed all the fingers and phalanges and whatever pieces that he had in the 20th ward that was moved from North St. Louis into South St. Louis. That process of moving of a ward was clearly contentious 10 years ago and landed this Board of Aldermen and this city on the BBC, who came down here to interview to find out what had happened for those who were not here. It was interesting to see that we made international news. Now, we didn't make international news when we had a major accomplishment, but we certainly made it when there were some issues related around redistricting. The law allows for a variance. It is almost impossible to make each ward exactly the same number. The census blocks really do not allow for that. When you do your redistricting, you have to calculate the census blocks in the district that you create. It is almost impossible to make each one of them equal because the census blocks do not shape themselves or allow for that. So since that is almost impossible, the law allows for a variance 5% over what the median should be and 5% below. What you see on this map here reflects what the law allows based upon the census tracts. 5% above that median or 5% below. It is not outside of those boundaries. It is reasonable. It is one that was worked out in a consensus process where individuals were willing to compromise and to work out very sensitive and very complicated issues with each other. I think that this is what this board has shown here today, that it was able to cut across the various issues, the various concerns, the various ideas that each alderman has or each alderwoman has, and to work out a consensus map whereby all names are on it as a co-sponsor. That is my first time seeing this, Mr. President. And certainly the BBC is not down here covering this today, nor do we see the major media down here covering the fact that we all agree upon something and that we have unanimity, unity, cohesion, and a consensus. I find that interesting, which should let us give a real picture of what the media tends to look for, as opposed to unity and consensus, simply conflict and disdain. Again, I'd like to compliment the Alderwoman from the 7th on her fine work She spent many hours there. Once she did select me as the vice chair, I spent some of that time with her, and I know how difficult that was. And I'd like to thank members of this board for being so cooperative with each other. That doesn't mean there wasn't issues, and that doesn't mean that sometimes you didn't hear the voices raised in the back room, but that's where they were raised so that we could come forward with some kind of consensus. She did a fine job, in my opinion, and deserves the credit for this, as well as you too, Mr. President, for making this possible in this environment. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further comments? Alderman from the 4th.
Mr. President, I'd be remiss if I didn't get up and say that to congratulate Phyllis and Alderman Terry Kennedy. You should always let Terry be last, but I could not hold my monkey. Yesterday was the first time I ever seen Terry mad. He kept giving and giving and giving and giving, and he was saying, well, what am I going to do? On Father's Day, they called me. I got about 3 calls from Terry. Thanks for calling. I got 3 calls from him about this process. Now, it is not and has not been a good process for me because I gave up to Alderman Troop, several hundred people, and then ended up with a lot of junk down on the east end of my community. And people know about me and the tires and the stolen buildings and all. And to smooth that over, I was still screaming yesterday, and Phyllis was hollering at me. And I was screaming yesterday, and Marlene Davis, smooth as she is, said that she would take the junk that I didn't want. So the process came out fair, and I want to congratulate the committee on I got what I wanted. That's what I was after, only what I wanted for my constituents in that community. But I still got some of April's tire shops, but we're going to live with the process. And we're trying to get along in this polarized place. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. Any further comments? Any further comments? Alderwoman from the 7th, you recognize the close.
Mr. President, it's great pleasure on my part to close this. I don't want to go back in that room again or play with that computer, with the exception of one thing. I want to be able to have the computer draw the line so we could see what would have happened if it had been completely computerized. But I have to say to everyone, thank you for your cooperation. Thank you for your diligence in coming in for many meetings. Thank you for reading over the legal descriptions to make sure we've done it correctly. I have to say great thanks to Dave Sweeney and to my secretary, Sherry, for the assistance they provided in this process. And great thanks to Terry Kennedy and Lewis for the support you've given me while we've been going through this. The law says that there was talk about the discrepancy between figures. The law allows 5% above the average, and for the average in the city, there's 11,004 people, I believe. I don't remember the figure anymore. I have so many figures in my mind. But everybody is within the 5% range, either 5% up or 5% down. Yes, there will be a problem 10 years from now. There's always a problem 10 years from now, and we can't predict the future. In regard to how many aldermen there are, the voters have voted twice already that they want to retain 28 aldermen. I would say that the numbers we're representing are significantly higher than many municipalities in our surrounding municipalities outside our limits. So, yes, we can look at that again. We can put it before the voters again, but I can't make you promises about what the size of the board would or should be. That's something we can discuss in the future. As I said, this is a process that we go through, and while some may represent more people than others, we all have the same amount of resources. That means that we have the same amount of money for street paving, and right, some wards are quite large. I've always had a very large ward because I represent downtown, or a good portion of it. That means my resources are taken from my neighborhoods and put into downtown many times in order to make the downtown a more habitable place for our businesses. So everybody has to work with the resources that we're given, and it's a challenge, especially in this day. So 10 years from now, I won't be here. I've gone through 3 of these. I'm not going to do it again. I can promise you. And who knows what the future is going to bring. Our city can change dramatically. Yes, we could have a downtown alderman at that time, and maybe we'll label that ward the 8th. I would also say that many of the appendages that you see on the map are appendages that are there because we went through the conversation saying, what is it you want to keep? And for instance, South Grand remained in the 8th because the alderman had committed a lot of funds to a project there. I would say to you that there are many appendages that have housing corporations that have worked in a particular district. That's why those are there. So when you look at the appendages, yes, they may split neighborhoods, but there's a reason for those. So our job here is to represent every constituent within our ward. And if we're doing our job, then hopefully in the future we're going to see neighborhoods rebuilt, because a lot of us have invested a lot of time, a lot of funds into making these neighborhoods stronger. And I am particularly proud of my ward. We gained 3,000 people and I had to dump them. So I can tell you it hurts. The challenge is, let's make the city as strong as we can, and I think going through this process has been a good one because we've all worked together to make something successful. And let's take that effort and move it forward to make our city successful. With that, I renew my motion.
It's been moved and seconded that we perfect Board Bill number 2, floor substitute. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, motion carries. I also want to just really thank the Alderwoman from the 7th for all of her hard work. I don't know how many of you know how many weekends and evenings and holidays when everybody else was doing everything else, she was right over here in this room working, because she would call me and I would have an opportunity to go over there and meet with her. And I think that is so commendable. And also the alderman from the 18th that came in at a critical time to make sure that everybody continued to come together and get these things done. This whole board needs to be commended, but specifically the alderwoman from the 7th. I think that you did a yeoman's job, especially considering what happened the last time. I think you did an incredible job of getting this done. We all know that we all heard the story of the old man with a truckload of diamonds, and he's going home with a truckload of diamonds. He pulls over and figures out that there's a flaw in each and every one of them. He promptly took that truckload of diamonds to the dump, threw the keys to the man at the dump, said, "I'm so mad about all of these problems in these diamonds. You can have every last one of them and take the truck too." We know that those things happen. We know that we can find a problem in everything. But in this process, great job, Alderwoman from the 7th, Alderman from the 18th. I'm going to ask everybody to stand and join me in a round of applause for them in getting this thing done. Alderman from the 8th, you can join us. All right, we'll move on. Anyone like to take any further bills off of any of our informal calendars? Alderman from the 12th, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm move Board Bill 66 to be perfected and printed.
It's been moved by the Alderman from the 12th. I entertain a second on that one. Seconded by the Alderman from the 12th. That was a good one. Alderman from the 12th, please proceed.
I renew my motion.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, motion carries. Congratulations, Alderman. A little belated, but congratulations on the passage of your first bill. Perfection of your first bill. Anyone like to take any further bills off of any of our informal calendars? Anyone like to take any further bills off any of our informal calendars? We will dispense with line items 9 and 10. First reading of board bills.
Board Bill 123, sponsored by Alderman Wessels, an ordinance pertaining to the allocation and approval of public funds, amending Section 1 of Ordinance 67794, Section 8 of Ordinance 67477, Section 9 of Ordinance 64994, Section 5 of Ordinance 65435, containing a severability clause. Board Bill 124, sponsored by Alderman Kennedy, and ordinance recommended and approved by the Board of Estimate and Apportionment, authorizing and directing the Director of Airports and the Comptroller to enter into and execute the consent to assignment and Fourth Amendment to Lambert Airport concession agreement by and between the city and Paradise concession to Arch and containing an emergency clause. That's the extent of our first readings.
Reference to committee.
To the Ways and Means Committee, Board Bill 123, and to the Transportation Committee, Board Bill 124. That's the extent of reference to committees.
Second reading.
Following board bills were reported out of the Public Employees Committee. Board Bill 102, sponsored by Alderman Schmidt, an ordinance to regulate employer and employee working relationships between the city and all employees under the civil service, including a compensation plan, terms and conditions of employment, benefits, leaves of absence, authorization for a deferred compensation plan, containing an emergency clause. The following board bills were reported out of the Housing Committee. Board Bill 109, committee substitute, sponsored by Alderwoman Young, an ordinance affirming adoption of a redevelopment plan, redevelopment area, redevelopment project area, and a redevelopment project, amending ordinance 67681, authorizing the execution of a redevelopment agreement between the city and St. Louis Food Hub TIF, containing a severability clause. Board Bill 110, committee substitute, sponsored by Alderwoman Young, an ordinance recommended by the Board of Estimate and Apportionment, amending ordinance 67678, authorizing and directing the issuance and delivery of not to exceed $7,200,000 plus issuance costs, maximum principal amount of tax increment revenue notes for City Hospital, RPA 3 redevelopment project phase 2. Board Bill 111, sponsored by Alderwoman Young, an ordinance authorizing the execution of an amendment to the redevelopment agreement by and between the city and Near South Side Improvement Corporation, containing a severability clause. Board Bill 112, sponsored by Alderwoman Young, an ordinance recommended by the Board of Estimate and Apportionment, authorizing and directing the issuance and delivery of not to exceed $6,076,244.80 plus issuance cost principal amount of tax increment revenue notes for Lafayette Square Historic District Redevelopment Project. Board Bill 113, sponsored by Alderwoman Cruzen, an ordinance authorizing the execution of an amendment to the redevelopment agreement by and between the city and Loop TIF, containing a severability clause. Board Bill 114, sponsored by Alderwoman Cruzen, an ordinance recommended by the Board of Estimate and Apportionment, amending and restating ordinance 67069, authorizing and directing the issuance and delivery of not to exceed $6 million plus issuance cost principal amount of tax increment revenue notes for Delmore East Loop redevelopment project. Board Bill 115, sponsored by Alderman Villa, an ordinance affirming adoption of a redevelopment plan, redevelopment area, and redevelopment project, authorizing the execution of a redevelopment agreement between the city and Carondelet TIF, designating Carondelet TIF as developer of the redevelopment area, authorizing other related actions in connection with the redevelopment of certain property within the redevelopment area and containing a severability clause. Board Bill 116, sponsored by Alderman Villa, an ordinance recommended by the Board of Estimate and Apportionment, amending ordinance 68094, authorizing and directing the issuance and delivery of not to exceed $838,851 plus issuance cost principal amount of tax increment notes for South Carondelet District 3 Phase 1 Series 201 AB and not to exceed $1,356,793 plus issuance cost principal amount of tax increment revenue notes for South Carondelet District 3 redevelopment project phase 2, containing a severability clause. Board Bill 117, sponsored by Alderwoman Young, an ordinance approving a blighting study and a redevelopment plan for the Cass North 1st, Malanphy North 2nd redevelopment area, containing a severability clause. Board Bill 118, sponsored by Alderwoman Davis, an ordinance approving a blighting study and a redevelopment plan for the 212 South Grand redevelopment area, containing a severability clause. Board Bill 119, sponsored by Alderman Wessels, an ordinance amending the following ordinances and adopted in the calendar year 2002 through 2010 to include the Industrial Development Authority of the city in the definitions of approved investor, original purchaser, and qualified institutional buyer, and containing a severability clause. The following board bills were reported out of Transportation Committee. Board Bill 88, sponsored by Alderman Kennedy, an ordinance recommended and approved by the Board of Estimate and Apportionment, authorizing and directing the Director of Airports and the Comptroller to enter into and execute the Lambert Airport Cargo City Lease Agreement between the city and Southwest Airlines, containing an emergency clause. Board Bill 89, sponsored by Alderman Kennedy, and an ordinance recommended and approved by the Board of Estimate and Apportionment, authorizing and directing the Director of Airports and the Comptroller to enter into and execute the license agreement for a K-Lot facility between the city and United States of America, Department of Transportation, Federal Aviation Administration, containing a severability and an emergency clause. Board Bill 92, sponsored by Alderman Villa, an ordinance recommended by the Port Authority Commission, authorizing and directing the mayor and the comptroller to enter into a lease agreement between the city and ACL Transportation Services, LLC, for certain land and mooring privileges on the unimproved wharf for a period of 10 years, commencing on the date of execution, with 3 5-year mutual options. Board Bill 93, sponsored by Alderwoman Young, an ordinance recommended by the Port Authority Commission of the city, authorizing and directing the mayor and the comptroller to enter into a lease agreement between the city and Fred Weber Incorporated for certain land and mooring privileges on the unimproved wharf for a period of 10 years, commencing on the date of execution, with 3 5-year mutual options. The following board bills were reported out of the Ways and Means Committee. Board Bill 95, Committee Substitute, sponsored by Alderwoman Flowers, and ordinance approving the petition to establish the North Broadway Cary Community Improvement District, establishing the North Broadway Cary Community Improvement District, containing a severability clause. Board Bill 100, Committee Substitute, sponsored by Alderwoman Griffin, and ordinance authorizing and directing the mayor and the comptroller to execute upon receipt of and in consideration the sum of $100,000, a quitclaim deed to Remise, Release, and Forever Quitclaim into Grace Hill Neighborhood Health Centers located in Block 569, which property is known as 1717 Biddle, containing an emergency clause. Board Bill 101, Committee Substitute, sponsored by Alderwoman Young, an ordinance authorizing and directing the mayor and the comptroller to execute upon receipt of and in consideration the sum of $100,000 of quitclaim deeds to Remise, Release, and Forever Quitclaim into Grace Hill Neighborhood Health Centers located in City Block 1335, which property is known as 2220 Limp, containing an emergency clause. Board Bill 105, Committee Substitute, sponsored by Alderwoman Davis, an ordinance approving the petition of owners of certain real property to establish the 212 South Grand Community Improvement District, authorizing the execution of a transportation project agreement between the city and 212 South Grand Transportation Development District, containing an emergency clause and a severability clause. Board Bill 106, sponsored by Alderwoman Young, an ordinance approving the petition of various owners of certain real property to establish the City Hospital Powerhouse Community Improvement District, authorizing the execution of a transportation project agreement between the city and City Hospital Powerhouse Transportation Development District, and containing an emergency clause and a severability clause. Board Bill 108, sponsored by Alderwoman Young, an ordinance authorizing execution of a transportation project agreement between the city and St. Louis Food Hub Transportation Development District, making certain findings with respect thereto, authorizing other related actions in connection with the transportation project, and containing a severability clause. Board Bill 121, sponsored by Alderman Ogilvie and Alderwoman Cruzen, an ordinance approving the petition of an owner of certain real property to establish a community improvement district, establishing the Cheshire Annex Community Improvement District, authorizing the execution of a transportation project agreement between the city and Cheshire Transportation Development District, authorizing other related actions in connection with the TDD project, containing an emergency clause and a severability clause. Board Bill 104, sponsored by Alderwoman Young, an ordinance recommended by the Board of Estimate and Apportionment, authorizing a supplemental appropriation, amending Ordinance 68643, commonly referred to as the City Annual Operating Plan for fiscal year 2010 through 2011, appropriating and setting apart into new special fund 1116 Downtown Vending District Parks Fund from payments to be received from street vendors in the Downtown Vending District, the sum of $25,300, containing an emergency clause. Board Bill Board Bill 122, sponsored by Alderwoman Griffin, and ordinance recommended by the Board of Estimate and Apportionment, approving the modification of documents entered into in connection with the police capital improvement sales tax leasehold revenue bonds, Series 2007, approving and authorizing execution of the first supplemental deed of trust and security agreement in connection with such modification, containing a severability clause. That's the extent of our second readings.
The Alderwoman from the 19th is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the board. I move to suspend the rules for the purpose of moving Board Bill 118 from the second reading calendar to the perfection calendar.
It's been moved. Do we have a second? Second. It's been moved by the Alderwoman from the 19th and seconded by the Alderman from the 11th to move 118 from our second reading to our perfection calendar. Madam Clerk, will you call the roll?
Alderman True. Alderwoman Flowers. Alderman Bosley. Alderman Moore. Alderwoman Griffin. Alderwoman Triplett. Alderwoman Young.
Aye.
Alderman Conway. Alderman Ortman. Alderman Vollmer. Alderman Villa. Alderman Arnowitz. Alderman Wessels. Alderwoman Howard. Alderwoman Florida. Alderwoman Behringer. Alderman Rhodey. Alderman Kennedy. Alderwoman Davis.
Aye.
Alderman Schmidt. Alderman French. Alderman Boyd. Alderman Vaccaro.
It's not on there.
Alderman Ogilvie. Alderman Cone.
Aye.
Alderman Williamson.
Aye.
Alderman Carter.
Aye.
Alderwoman Cruzen. President Reed. Alderman Bosley. Alderman Moore. Alderwoman Griffin. Alderwoman Triplett. Alderwoman Howard. Alderman Rhodey. Alderman French. 22 aye votes.
By your vote, you suspended the rules and moved 118 to our perfection calendar. Perfection consent calendar.
Thank you. It's on. We're going to go to consent. Okay.
Board Bill 90.
Oh, I'm sorry. Report of special committees. We have none, so we'll move to the perfection consent calendar. Madam Clerk, will you read the bills?
Board Bill 99, sponsored by Alderwoman Griffin, an ordinance recommended by the Board of Estimate and Apportionment, authorizing and directing the issuance and sale of one or more series of the St. Louis Water Revenue Refunding Bonds in an aggregate principal amount not to exceed $16 million, containing an emergency clause. Board Bill 64, sponsored by Alderman Villa, an ordinance approving the blighting study and redevelopment plan for 7416 through 18 Virginia, containing a severability clause. Board Bill 79, sponsored by Alderwoman Flowers, an ordinance recommended by the Board of Estimate and Apportionment, authorizing and directing the issuance and delivery not to exceed $3,500,000 plus issuance cost principal amount of tax increment revenue notes for North Broadway Cary redevelopment project and containing a severability clause. Board Bill 87, sponsored by Alderman Boyd, an ordinance approving a blighting study and a redevelopment plan for 5967 through 69 Dr. Martin Luther King Drive and containing a severability clause. Board Bill 94, sponsored by Alderwoman Triplett, an ordinance authorizing execution of amendment to the redevelopment agreement by and between the city and St. Louis Leased Housing Associates 3 Limited Partnership, containing a severability clause. Board Bill 96, sponsored by Alderwoman Young, an ordinance authorizing the execution of an amendment to the redevelopment agreement by and between the city and Hadley Dean Building TIF and containing a severability clause. Board Bill 97, sponsored by Alderwoman Davis, an ordinance amending Ordinance 68194, authorizing the execution of amendment to the redevelopment agreement by and between the city and Council Towers Senior Apartments, prescribing the form and details of said amendment, making certain findings with respect thereto, authorizing other related actions, and containing a severability clause. Board Bill 98, sponsored by Alderwoman Young, an ordinance authorizing the execution of an amendment to the redevelopment agreement by and between the city and Glenwood Griffin, prescribing the form and details of said amendment to the redevelopment agreement, making certain actions, certain findings with respect thereto, authorizing other related actions, and containing a severability clause. Board Bill 60, sponsored by Alderwoman Triplett, an ordinance approving a blighting study and a redevelopment plan for 1539 Vale Place, containing a severability clause. Board Bill 63, sponsored by Alderman Villa, an ordinance approving a blighting study and a redevelopment plan for 3623 Steins, containing a severability clause. Board Bill 81, sponsored by Alderman Rhodey, an ordinance approving a blighting study and a redevelopment plan for 4314 and 4453 Gibson, containing a severability clause. Board Bill 83, sponsored by Alderman Ogilvie, an ordinance approving a blighting study and a redevelopment plan for 1538, 1540, 1562, and 1564 Fairmont, containing a severability clause. Board Bill 84, sponsored by Alderwoman Florida, an ordinance approving a blighting study and a redevelopment plan for 3887 Wyoming, containing a severability clause. Board Bill 85, sponsored by Alderman Vollmer, an ordinance approving a blighting study and a redevelopment plan for 2025 Hereford, containing a severability clause. That's the extent of perfection consent.
The Alderman from 13th is recognized on the perfection consent calendar.
Yeah, thank you, Madam President. I move for perfection of the aforementioned bills on the consent calendar.
It's been moved and seconded that we perfect the consent calendar. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? By your vote, you have perfected the consent calendar. The Alderwoman from the 18th is recognized on... We'll go to the perfection calendar now, and Madam Clerk, will you read Board Bill 118?
Board Bill 118, sponsored by Alderwoman Davis, an ordinance approving a blighting study and a redevelopment plan for 212 South Grand redevelopment area, containing a severability clause.
The Alderwoman from the 19th is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move to introduce amendment to Board Bill 118. What should I do?
Move for perfection. I believe you need
I'm sorry, I need to perfect
perfection
it first. I'm sorry. And I want to move to perfect Board Bill 118, floor substitute. Thank you.
It's been moved and seconded that we perfect Board Bill 118.
Yes, Board Bill 118.
It's been moved and seconded, and all in favor of perfection of 118? Oh,
no.
Sorry, it's been a long time since I've been up here, so. Madam, I think you have a floor substitute to offer.
Thank you. Yes, I'd like to move to introduce an amendment, which is a floor substitute for Board Bill 118. Thank you.
It's been moved by the Alderwoman from the 18th and seconded by the Alderman from the 20th that we accept a floor substitute for Board Bill 118. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Discussion? Madam, on floor substitute for 118.
I just wanted to give a little clarity for not just the chamber, but for the general public. The floor substitute identifies and clarifies what we already have in the bill, and it's an extension of page 5, line 2. I'd like to also commend Alderman Cohen for helping us get to this point. And it simply says, any application for a demolition permit shall be referred to the Cultural Resources Officer and Preservation Board for review in accordance with the procedures of the demolition review process of the Cultural Resource Office and Preservation Board as set forth in Chapter 24.40 of the St. Louis City Revised Code.
Madam, I think that we're playing insider baseball here, and yes, those of us who are on the floor know that 118, what it's about, but I think for those people who might be at home, if you could give a little explanation.
And I shall. Board Bill 118 was heard in committee yesterday and is a board bill that was requesting me to provide an additional tool, which was tax abatement. And that's what the bill was about. The bill did not ask for demolition. But in our standard process of crafting these bills, there's certain language that is required. And the language also identifies what may or may not happen in different situations. The general public is concerned about the structure itself, which is the Del Taco restaurant. The Del Taco restaurant, unfortunately, has come into bad times economically, and so therefore it will not be providing that retail service again. The developer on that site was asked for tax abatement to assist in creating a finance opportunity to bring a new retailer in, preferably, and if that does not happen, then we would definitely be in the decision-making process through those various departments, as were mentioned in this amendment, to decide what would happen to that structure. But unfortunately, there was a lot of media frenzy, a lot of misinformation, and a lot of quotes made to steer the public in believing that the bill was a demolition bill when it was only a tax abatement bill. But hopefully this amendment will give clarity to that and also give clarity to the process and procedures that are required for anyone who requests a demolition permit with the City of St. Louis. Thank you.
Thank you for the explanation. Would you like to make a final motion on this then?
Hold on. Got people.
Is there discussion? Alderwoman from the 15th. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do like to say that, Madam Chair. Would the Alderwoman yield?
Yes.
Thank you. I do appreciate this concession on offering this amendment to clarify the process. This amendment clarifies the process and adds language that strengthens that any application for a demolition permit shall be referred to the Cultural Resources Officer and Preservation Board for review in accordance with the procedures of the demolition review process of the Cultural Resources Office and the Preservation Board. We were told that that there was no language that would usurp the Cultural Resources Board yesterday. So I agree and support you and appreciate the fact that you strengthened that by putting that in the board bill. But it is not typical for demolition language to be in a tax abatement bill. And that I have on the advice of Dale Rusatz. I would feel more comfortable if we would amend it even further, because it says, beginning on page 5, line 2, after the words, demolition of the existing building in the area is necessary and desirable to allow for redevelopment of the area in accordance with the plan. That strengthens a position that demolition is necessary. And if we as a board send that over to Cultural Resources, they may think that we think it's necessary. And I think that what would improve this is adding one simple word, if. If we added the word if demolition of the existing building in the area is necessary, it implies that Cultural Resources makes that determination. Would the Alderwoman consider the word if in an amendment too?
I'd like to have a moment for consideration and hear other conversation, please.
Thank you, Alderwoman.
In the meantime, how about we'll go to the Alderman from the 24th.
Madam Chair, I'll just echo the comments of the Alderwoman from the 19th and maybe expand a little bit for those members of the board who were not at the committee hearing yesterday. There was a considerable amount of discussion regarding whether once this bill passed, if indeed the Cultural Resources Office would have to review and send forth the recommendation to the Preservation Review Board if a demolition permit was applied for. There was considerable discussion and perhaps disagreement on that point. So this amendment to Board Bill 118 clarifies that situation and just spells it out clearly so that it's clear that should a demolition permit be applied for, the Cultural Resources Office would have to review that demolition permit. with respect to the fact that the building is currently listed on the National Register of Historic Places. And also maybe to just further expand for the members of the board that weren't at the committee hearing yesterday, what has maybe sparked so much media interest in this building is the fact that it was listed on the National Historic Register in 2007, and that listing made available to the owner roughly $27 million in historic tax credits just a few years ago that were used not on this particular building, but on the 3 other buildings on the site. So with the acknowledgement that we've been able to preserve and renovate 3 buildings on the site that were co-listed with the Del Taco Phillips gas station. People are concerned that since this building is part of that complex, that a potential demolition would, perhaps affect those tax credits that had already been issued for the other buildings on the site. And with that, I'll yield the floor.
Alderwoman from the 19th, would you like to respond to the Alderwoman from the 15th? I understand there's some scribing going on in the background.
Okay, Madam Chair, I think that we probably could omit a word and add a word, change the language a little bit in that paragraph on page 5 to indicate the consideration. So what we're going to do is we'll have that prepared, placed on everyone's desk, and what I'd like to do is just to go ahead and share with you on the beginning of page 5, line 2, we'll omit the word after and put it after the words there and put in if demolition of the existing building in the area is desirable, not necessary. We'll take out the words necessary and we'll say desirable to allow for redevelopment in the area. So that way it is still clarifying the process that we undertake in the city of St. Louis when you apply for a demolition permit. And if the building falls into certain categories, most especially cultural resources is involved and the preservation board. So that we're just clarifying that again. And if doesn't change anything, because again, the developer has to present his case to those 2 entities and they will make the decisions on what is best. And as I stated yesterday in committee, I'm glad we have the checks and balances there, the professionals and those who have been appointed by the mayor who are absent from what I consider to be influence from this board. And I have no problems with the process. I think it's great. It has worked over the years. So as we move forward here, I'd like to just I believe we need to put this on everybody's desk. Is that happening? Okay.
So what we are considering is an amendment to the amendment to Board Bill 118 at this point.
Amendment to the floor substitute.
Okay. So we will pause to wait for the committee.
I thank you for your patience.
For the copy machine. Alderwoman from the 15th. Alderwoman from the 15th.
Yes, ma'am.
You were suggesting an amendment Did you offer an amendment? I didn't see it.
I did not. I
Okay.
did not. It was a suggestion to Alderwoman Davis. I was going to offer an amendment, but I am not, because they... Are you allowing for me to offer my amendment?
We have it.
Alderwoman, then
So
it
they've
is.
taken it into
So this
consideration
would be
and- Okay.
Amendment, well, it would be Amendment 2.
Thank you.
Yes.
Wait a minute, hold it. That's not what I agreed to. No, that's not what I agreed to. I agreed to amend this floor substitute. Amendment 1. I agreed to amend my floor substitute to include the word if. And also take out, and I added something that you didn't even ask for, which was take out the word necessary.
I agree.
Okay?
I agree.
All right. Can you
Okay.
accept this?
So it's not an amendment.
No.
I thought it was. David.
No.
It's her amendment.
Yeah. We're okay. It's an amendment to the floor substitute, which I'm offering and is now on everyone's desk.
Okay. So the Alderwoman from the 19th has offered an amendment to the floor substitute. Is there a
Yes.
second for that? It's been moved and seconded. Point of order. State your point of order.
Based on what I heard from the Alderwoman from the 19th, this is not the amendment. The amendment does not reflect what she just said. So maybe I don't have the correct amendment, because she said that she was taking out the word necessary. And that's not what I have.
Maybe you don't have that yet.
I believe they're still passing those out.
Okay.
So do you have it now?
Yeah.
It actually takes out two words, necessary and it just simply leaves desirable.
Okay.
Okay, so do you have the correct copy now?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
I'm still just a little bit confused. So I want to make, is there, would the sponsor just read what it will say after it's amended so I can follow this clearly?
Yes, sir. On page 5 at line 2, it's going to say where it starts there, demolition of the existing building. And in front of that word demolition, it will say, if demolition of the existing building in the area is desirable to allow for redevelopment of the area in accordance with the plan. Also, what I had brought before you earlier will stay the same. Any application for a demolition permit shall be referred to the Cultural Resources Officer and Preservation Board for review in accordance with the procedures of the demolition review process of the Cultural Resource Offices and the Preservation Board as set forth in Chapter 24.40 of the St. Louis City Revised Code.
Thank you. That clarifies. Appreciate it.
Alderwoman, would you like to renew your motion?
I would like to renew my motion, please, for to perfect Board Bill 118 floor substitute.
As amended.
As amended.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor of perfecting Board Bill 118 floor substitute as amended, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? By your vote, you've perfected Board Bill 118 as amended.
Thank you.
All right. Third reading consent calendar.
We have none.
Third reading report of engrossment and final passage.
Board Bill 37 floor substitute.
Alderman from the 24th.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I request we move Board Bill 37 floor substitute to the third reading final passage informal calendar for consideration next week.
Thank you. Madam Clerk, please place Board Bill 37 floor substitute on the informal third reading calendar.
So noted. That's the extent of third reading engrossment and final passage.
Report of enrollment.
We have none.
And courtesy resolution consent calendar. Alderman from the 13th? Oh, okay. I'll entertain a motion on the courtesy resolutions consent calendar. So moved by the Alderman from the 13th, seconded by the Alderman from the 10th. All in favor of passage of the courtesy consent calendar, say aye. By your vote, you've passed the courtesy resolutions consent calendar. First reading of resolutions?
We have none.
Second reading of resolutions?
We have none.
Miscellaneous and unfinished business?
We have none.
Announcements.
Monday, July the 4th, the office will be closed, 4th of July holiday. No meetings next week until Friday, July the 8th, full board meeting, 10 a.m. in the chambers. That's the extent of my announcements.
Other announcements? Alderman from the 24th.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On Monday, July 4th, the Dogtown Historical Society will be dedicating a new monument at the intersection of Clayton and Tam Avenue to honor those soldiers killed in battle from World War II from World War I, to the present day. They'll be dedicating a monument July 4th at noon. I'd like to thank the Dogtown Historical Society for doing the research, and also note that former 28th Ward Alderman Dan McGuire was instrumental in compiling the list of those killed in action. Thank you.
Alderman from the 22nd.
Thank you, Madam President, members of the board. I'd like to make an announcement that I have an honored guest this morning, Mr. Andre Williams, my committee man from the 22nd Ward.
Alderman from the 10th.
Thank you, Madam President. This Saturday, July the 2nd, will be a professional fireworks show at Sublette Park. The park is located at the corner of Sublette and Arsenal. Please arrive early and get some good seats. It's a wonderful show. It goes on about 35 minutes. And enjoy the holiday weekend. Thank you.
Alderman from the 20th.
The Alderman from the 10th reminded me, so thank you very much, sir. And I don't know who is watching this, but I urge all parents, guardians, aunts, uncles, any adults, responsible adults, to remember that fireworks are dangerous for their children. They are also illegal to be held or discharged within the city of St. Louis. They have been illegal for discharge in the city of St. Louis for many years, but also having them is now illegal. You can go to firework displays such as the Alderman from the 10th Ward talked about, or at our fair St. Louis down in the 7th Ward on the riverfront, and there are great displays that you can see throughout the various communities. It is very dangerous. Even the sparklers for children can be very dangerous. Go to any of the emergency rooms over this 4th of July weekend and you will see lots of children who are disfigured or harmed greatly by these fireworks. Not to mention that they also create property damage in many of our areas. So I urge folks to go and attend these great displays rather than breaking the law. Thank you.
Any other announcements? Alderman from the 26th.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. I appreciate it. Just want to announce Robin Boyce, Executive Assistant to the Comptroller, has received her MBA degree. Just want to congratulate her and thank you for that, on the hard work that she's done.
Alderwoman from the 2nd.
Thank you, Madam President. I'd like to announce that tomorrow evening, July the 1st, we're having our Live on the Rocks concert from 6 to 12. It's absolutely free to the public. We're going to have live entertainment. Bring your lawn chair, bring a little bug spray. We actually changed the location from the Chain and Rocks Bridge just south of the Water Department at North Riverfront Park. So I don't think it's as many trees, so I don't think the bugs are going to eat us up as much. But we'll have plenty of food, plenty of alcohol. Come on out, adults, and have a good time. Thank you.
Any other announcements? If not, the Alderman from the 13th is recognized on excused Alderman.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam President. I'd first like to recognize as my special guest the former Director of CDA and now Big Shot contractor, Brian Murphy. Let's see. Excuse Alderman. I'd like to move to excuse the Alderman from the 3rd, 14th, and 17th wards due to necessary absence.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right. The Alderman from the 13th is recognized on the adjournment.
Thank you, Madam President. I move to adjourn the meeting until Friday, 10 a.m., July 8th.
Thank you. This meeting is adjourned. Have a happy and safe holiday. All in favor of adjourning this meeting, say aye.